I'm Albert Carnesale, Dean of the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and it's my privilege to welcome all of you this evening. This is an exciting event for Harvard University. Those of you who know Harvard well know that the university has recently made major commitments to internationalization, to environmental studies, and to cooperation across the various schools and disciplines to bring the resources of the university to bear on important problems that face our societies today. Our speaker tonight is here in connection with a major interdisciplinary research project that is being developed by the University Committee on the Environment. This committee, chaired by Professor Michael McElroy of the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences, and with Vice Chairman, our own Kennedy School Professor William Clark, has under its umbrella a project focusing on China. The China project is chaired by Professor McElroy and Professor Shiping Xu. This is going to be hard for me, folks. Stick with it. Of the School of Public Health, and involves the collaboration of 18 members of the Harvard faculty from 10 different departments and schools. Now, the Chinese delegation tonight includes many of the leaders responsible for China's environmental and technology policies. Time constrains me from introducing all of our guests, but allow me to recognize a few in particular. First, Professor Hu Chi-hung, Vice President of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. Professor Hu. Ambassador Zhang Wei-Chao, the Consul General of the People's Republic of China in New York. And Dr. Ye Ruqiu, the Deputy Director of the Chinese National Environmental Protection Agency. Let's see, I'd also like to acknowledge is Dr. Susan Weld here this evening. She was going to be here. And Mr. John Owen, the British Consul General in Boston. John? Now, tonight's speaker, Dr. Sung Jian, is State Counselor, Chairman of the State Science and Technology Commission, Head of the leading group in charge of study, development, and protection of marine resources, and Chairman of the State Environmental Protection Commission. That's a lot of titles, even by Harvard standards. He's the person primarily responsible for science, technology, and environmental policy in China. Given the size of China, he probably is responsible for the quality of more land, more water, more air, more technology, and more public health than anyone else on Earth. Dr. Zheng was born into a peasant family. He studied engineering and mechanics and began his academic career at Moscow University. Later, at the China Space Flight Research Institute, he made major contributions to the theory and practical engineering aspects in the field of spaceflight research. In 1980, he visited the United States and lectured at Harvard, MIT, and several other universities. And it was during this visit that he was encouraged to apply the principles of cybernetics to the study of social problems, including population control. Now, I should mention this is only for a very few of you, but I very rarely get this opportunity. It was in discussion with him that I learned that my doctoral dissertation and his subject of research were closely related. So for those of you familiar with government, I know you're all interested in the applications of the second method of Lyapunov to the stability of systems of partial differential equations. But we both did that. He, however, was more successful at it, which is why I went into public policy. Now, his subsequent work became the basis for China's family planning policy. He's an elected member of the Academy of Sciences, a recipient of the Albert Einstein Award from the International Association for Mathematical Modeling. He's the author of 4 books, 2 of which are in English, and some 120 scholarly articles. Dr. Zheng has recently arrived from Washington, where his delegation met with the Vice President of the United States, the Secretaries of State, Commerce, Energy, and Interior, and the Assistant to the President for Science and Technology. The title of his address tonight is China, a Land of Hope. He's on a very tight time schedule. I hope we will have some time for questions and answers. That will depend on how things go, but it'll be my responsibility to keep him on schedule. We'll try our best. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Zheng Jiang.
Respected Mr. Provost Professor Jerry Green, respected Professor Mark Roy, ladies and gentlemen, it is truly a great honor and privilege for me to speak before this gathering and share with you some facts and thoughts about the development of People's Republic of China. It's an honor because the reputation of our Harvard has gone far beyond the boundary of the United States. 14 years ago, I had a chance to spend some time here as a visiting professor invited by Larry, Professor Ho. Today, it gives me a lot of warm memories to come back today. A visit to Harvard is always a chance to learn. I am here also to learn from you. Although my academic expertise is somewhat removed from this broad subject, I will do my best to comply with the invitation of the Provost Professor Jerry Green to focus my talk on the subject of economy, energy, and environment protection of China. China's average annual GNP growth has reached 9.6% ever since it started economic reforms and opening the door to the outside world 15 years ago. And its GNP of 1993 came up to about $500 billion US, 13.4% higher than previous year. A comparison between 1978 and last year would further demonstrate the point. The output value of industrial production went up 3.5 times in terms of comparable prices, with an annual growth rate 23.6% last year. The output of major industrial products grew substantially. Crude oil increased by 50%. Power generating capacity was tripled. Steel production has seen an increase of 1.8 times, now ranking the second in this world. China's grain output in 1993 was estimated almost twice as much as that of 15 years ago, and pork and beef quadrupled. This provides enough food supply to the 1.2 billion population, consisting of 22% of the world total, and on 7% of the world's arable land. The total value of retail sales of commodities have gone up, with an average annual growth of 8.5% if inflation is reduced. The country's import capacity by 25%. Foreign trade has maintained an upgoing momentum. It was estimated the total volume of import and export in 1993 was 18% higher than previous year. It is expected that during the remaining 7 years, by the end of this century, China would buy from the international market $125 billion US capital investment to support the economic growth. Thanks to the fast-growing economy, the Chinese people are living a much better life today. Statistics show that in 1993, per capita disposable income of rural and urban residents was 3 times as much as 15 years ago, if inflation rate was deducted. In 1993, the living expenditure of the average urban resident was almost 6 times higher than that of 1978. Now, I can affirm that absolute majority of the Chinese people believe that China is right on the way to realize its long-cherished dream to get off centuries' humiliation and poverty, to earn a dignified life and bring about national prosperity. From the late 70s, China decided to go all out for economic reconstruction and create an environment with less government interference and a bigger role for diversified economic forms. China started with a contracted responsibility system, first in the countryside, and then expand into other enterprises. Like a stone thrown into a quiet lake, the success in the countryside stirred up conceptual reorientation of people in all walks of life and led to nationwide economic changes. Enterprises with shareholding system or contracted system run publicly or privately have displayed great vitality. After 15 years, the newly emerged public and private enterprises have blossomed to such an extent that in 1991, they contributed 47% of the national industrial output and half of the total social protection. Most of them were brisk in operation, providing higher income for employees and bringing about more tax revenue for the government. The resounding success of the 5 special economic zones set up early 80s allows the enthusiasm across the country to build their own new zones in imitation. While a big number of economic and technological zones have mushroomed along the coast, it is already too late for the government to impose control. Every province and city strive to accelerate their economic growth in the similar way. In 1993, for instance, the early established 5 zones achieved 10 billion industrial output, realized 20 billion of exports, and attracted 14.5 billion foreign investment. In the late 70s, the hardest problem or crucial problem for the nation was the 800 million rural people, 75% of the total population size, bound by the collective commune system and age-old ideology of natural and self-sufficient economy with extremely low productivity. Poverty-stricken, a quarter of the rural families lived in scarcity of food and clothes. I recently noticed a statement by Mr. Gustav Spes, a friend of mine, the new administrator of UNDP. He said, let us recognize the right to food, both in concept and practice, as a universal human right. His statement is much like a celebrated dictum of Confucianism. The guarantee of food must be the top priority for everyone of every society. As another Confucian saying goes, suffering from hunger and cold, no sense of shame to hold. It was almost impossible for hungry people to think anything about their education, environment, or family planning. We are happy to witness today that 15 years after the commune system dissolved, food and clothing are no longer a daily concern for most rural people. The average annual per capita of grain supply has come to a steady 400 kilograms per capita. Pork and meat to 30 kilograms, and aquatic products to 15 kilograms. Their primary concern now is shifted to making more money by developing local industries. Rural industries have seen a phenomenal annual growth of 20% during the last decade and recorded a staggering of 45% last year. The total output value of rural industries is estimated to hit $330 billion, making up 30% of the nation's GNP and 45% of the country's exports. People say that rural enterprises now sustain half of heaven and half the government. Rural industries have created 110 million new job opportunities, releasing peasants from farmland, but retaining them in their native hometowns. That has considerably reduced the wave of population flow into cities and brought big economic reward to rural towns. To guarantee a growing agriculture as well as rural industries, the Science and Technology Circle has its own share of contributions. The Chinese government has mobilized about 1 million intellectuals to help the rural people to bid farewell to traditional way of farming, spread new technologies, train peasants to become market-oriented, and teach them the knowledge of management. 15 years ago, the rural people would say with much pride for their self-sufficient, idyllic life. They would say, raising a swine for a spring festival, keeping 2 chickens to exchange for salt, planting crops to feed their family only, raising a cow to plow a plot. With a fireplace in my heart, I am happy only next to God. This, however, has become the story of the past. Nowadays, farmers say that it is not enough just to have things to eat and wear. They need to make more money. They turn to commodity production and have acquired new ideology as described in the following. Want to be rich, produce fewer children and plant more trees. Want to be rich, set up more businesses and have more learned employees. Mr. Deng Xiaoping, the senior politician of China, summarized the experience of the recent decade by saying, development is fundamental. My friend, Mr. Gustav Spez, also voiced a similar opinion that peace, human rights, human dignity, democratization, environment protection can be achieved only in the context of development. Indeed, as Chinese saying goes, great minds think alike. I believe that the success of every noble pursuit of human society depends upon and can be achieved only by sustainable development. That is especially true for people of developing countries. For them, sustainable development is fundamental. An economic reform of such a scale and depth in such a giant nation is bound to face countless problems, risks, and challenges. This has been exactly the case with China. To name just a few, the clash between the old and the new concepts and ideologies, the disparity between diversified economic forms, the widening gap of development between coastal and inland areas of the country, the incompleteness of legislation and its enforcement, the lack of knowledge and proper training in management, and so on. Among them, any factor, even the market system itself, if not handled properly, could cause or lead to catastrophe. That is the reason why China should proceed very carefully, as walking on thin ice, to keep the system stable and robust. Instability would lead the country to chaos instead of development. A crucial problem of the country is to keep sustainable development of agriculture and to support the rapid growth of economy and ever-increasing population. In recent years, a tendency of decrease is seen in comparative profit of the agricultural sector. This in turn weakens farmers' enthusiasm for growing grain and cotton. In some places, farmers have even left their land idle and rushed to get a job in industries. The interests of rural and urban population often conflict with each other. This issue of equity is still an unsolved dilemma for the government. Energy supply is another strategic problem for China. Following a rapid economic growth, a huge demand on energy arises. This is a real challenge and a big opportunity for the development of energy industries. China will have a long way to go in terms of the development of power generation and energy supply, such as coal, hydropower, and nuclear, and others. In 1993, China generated 0.8 terakilowatt electricity. That means 700 kilowatt hours per capita, which is only half of the world average, and 1/15 of that of industrialized country. In the next 3 to 5 decades, it is expected to be increased by 10 times in order to reach the level of middle developed countries. It is anticipated that China will add 15,000 megawatts to her power generating capacity annually, thus doubling the scale of power production by the end of the century. China possesses abundant energy resources. She ranks first in the world hydro potentials, but only 9% of the potential is exploited. She ranks the third in coal reserve, with a proven deposit of 1 teratons of coal. Between 1981 and 1990, China's primary energy production and consumption increased by an annual 5%. In 1992, China's primary energy output reached 1 billion tons of coal equivalent. Coal provides 75% of energy supply for the nation. According to the report of a study, in the foreseeable future, coal will remain as primary energy and make up 70% of the total consumption. People need energy badly to be increased, and they do not care where it comes from. There exists great potential in energy saving. The Chinese government has set a target of saving 3% energy annually. After decades of service and multidisciplinary studies, China has started a huge hydro scheme over the Yangtze River, the Three Gorges Hydro Project. When completed, the $10 billion project shall provide an installed generating capacity of 18 gigawatts, among others. Wind, geothermal, solar, tidal, and biomass resources are widely tapped throughout the country. Today, you can see small wind generators for local households spread over the northwestern sparsely populated regions. The geothermal power stations in Tibet now meet over half of the power demand of its capital city of Lhasa. New and renewable energies will gradually increase their share in the overall energy profile. In rural areas, fuel wood trees are to account for 10% of the new afforestation acreage by 1995. A number of regulations have been promulgated to absorb foreign investment in the power industries. By 1992, China had attracted more than $10 billion into her power industry through international borrowing in the form of export credit, loans, leasing, or barter trade. In order to replenish the one-third shortage of manufacturing and investment capability of energy establishment, it was announced that China welcomes foreign investors to come and construct or upgrade the power industry as joint venture, cooperative venture, solo venture, or in any other form of investment. Clean coal combustion, long-distance transmission are on extra high voltage DC transmission, computer-based automatic control, power environment protection are the potential areas for cooperation China is looking for. During my this time visit, I had the pleasure to sign a protocol on cooperation on clean coal technology between the Science and Technology Commission of China and the United States Department of Energy. Under this protocol, the two sides will exchange technical information and experience collaborative visits, cooperation on research and development, technological demonstration, potential market assessment, training courses, and seminars are to be conducted between us. The perspective of heavy coal consumption has caused uneasiness among the science community and environmentalists, both domestically and in the international arena, who believe that it's environmentalists believe that the increase of CO2 emission would enhance the greenhouse effect and global warming, which might cause big upheaval throughout the world. But till now, we do not have alternatives practically realizable for both development and emission decrease have been proposed or found yet. Indeed, China is emitting 500 megatons CO2 each year at the present level. It ranks the third of that of U.S. U.S. is number one. China ranks number 3 in contribution to the world total emission, next to the U.S. and the former Soviet Union. Now, unfortunately, the Soviet Union collapsed and China is promoted to second place, right after U.S. With 5% annual growth, China will surpass U.S. in CO2 emission to become the number 1. However, ladies and gentlemen, a little comfort to economists and environmentalists of China comes from paleogeologists who argue irrefutable evidences show there were at least 5 times as much as global warming as before after each glaciation since the Mesozoic era, when there was no human existence at all. However, a big amount of coal deposited in the Mesozoic and Tertiary periods, that is 65 million years ago, took away most of the CO2 from the atmosphere without interference of human beings. Some chemists and oceanographers also join the argument. They say the ocean could be the greatest sink for the CO2. Other scientists say that the heat of the frigid Arctic air and the record shattering cold wave in North America last winter might mean something bigger going on. People are now worrying about the next ice age instead of global warming, because the recent studies of the Greenland's glacier cores show that transition from warm to frigid can come in a decade or 2. One may notice another kind of admonition expressed by Albert Bates in his book Climate in Crisis. He warns we have to consider ourselves pretty lucky. Anywhere along the way of evolution of our planet, something might have gone wrong, and the planet Earth could have become as lifeless as Mars and Venus. Now he asserted that now the climate change is just a case in point. As a judge in an old tale when mediating a firm debate, he said, "All of you are right. This is a case of uncertainty. Nowadays, most politicians, as I observe, proceed in the same way. Most people of the science community of China remain sober and optimistic. We have many remedies. I'll list some of them. Protection of forests, especially subtropical forests, and a large-scale afforestation campaign would save the atmosphere from being damaged by emission of greenhouse gases. We know that forests play a vital role in the recycling of carbon. On the average, 1 hectare of forest absorbs 90 tons of carbon per year. A nationwide campaign of afforestation has been going on since the late 70s. About 10 million hectares of mountainous area and wasteland are afforested each year in China. Besides, 2.4 billion trees are planted annually in the vicinity of cities and towns. The forest coverage of the nation's territory has been increasing steadily by 1% per year. The second remedy is the application of clean coal technology. For example, the integrated gasification and combined cycle IGCC technology for coal power plants would reduce 20% of emission of CO2, 90% of SO2 and NOx emission, with no dust release at all. 2 days ago, an agreement of cooperation on IGCC technology was signed by the US and PRC governments, aiming at the construction of a pilot plant in China. It is needless to recall that further exploitation of hydro, solar, wind, geothermal, tidal powers would greatly mitigate the situation. However, we have to admit that the pollution of fresh water and threat to biodiversity have become crucial problems for China. Unlike the coal burning, we have no alternative remedy but brief an uphill battle against polluters and endangered animal poachers. Following Stockholm Conference on Human Environment in 1972, China started to place earnestly efforts into environment protection, to draw up and promulgate related laws and regulations was the first step. In the 80s, the government made environmental protection to be a basic state policy and formulated the guiding principle, plan and implement environmental construction in such a way that economic, social, and environmental benefits are to be achieved concurrently. The following rules were announced, but put prevention first and combine it with administrative control. The polluter is to cure and establish a top-down administrative system for environmental management. In the 80s, the National People Congress has issued 4 laws on environmental protection, on marine environment protection, and on the prevention and control of water pollution, and so on. The State Council has issued over 20 administrative regulations. The establishment of law enforcement system requires some time to accomplish. National, provincial agencies and related monitoring and scientific supporting system have been established with a total of 70,000 staff members. China's legislation body and government agencies are now concentrating their efforts upon enhancing law enforcement, shut down small polluting enterprises, penalize big enterprises that pollute, and make compulsive the levy system for polluters. Public participation is another important component of China's efforts for environmental protection. In 1993, the Environmental Protection Committee of the National Congress, People's Congress, NEPA, that is the National Environmental Protection Agency, and other ministries initiated a TV campaign through the media, which was called A Journey into the Next Century for Environmental Protection. Major national news agencies sent over 100 reporters to 20 provinces for field visits in order to expose and denounce the polluters in public and reward good good behaviors. Hundreds of millions of people across the country watch the TV program with great interest and deep concern. They started to look around with a more critical eyes about the environment and made their voice heard. The campaign is said to be a mobilization of people to stand against polluters. Many scientists repeatedly warn that when China is moving toward a market economy, the people's concept must be updated, and that it is necessary to bring the awareness of environment protection to a new level in order to achieve sustainable development. Considerable results have been recorded. From 1982 to 1992, with double GNP and triple the industrial output value, the overall discharge of pollutants did not go up correspondingly. And the general environmental quality remained basically stable. The following are some figures to illustrate the point. The industrial wastewater stayed at the same level of 24 billion tons per year. The discharge of industrial wastewater for unit production value decreased almost 3 times. And the output of solid waste for unit GNP dropped more than twice. The emission of smoke and dust from coal burning kept its 14 million tons per year, and the industrial fly ash emission was cut down from 13 million to 5 million tons. The annual daily average of total suspended particles in cities was improved from 800 micrograms to reduced to 400 micrograms per cubic meters in 1992. Another problem for China is facing is the overloaded land, a great concern for China's population. At present, the annual average population growth is 15 to 17 million population per year. And the progressive decrease rate of farmland is about 300,000 hectares per year, reducing the per capita farmland from around 0.2 hectare 40 years ago to less than 0.1 hectare today. In spite of the efforts to reduce total fertility rate of the population from 2.3 per woman to less than 2.0, China's population will still be growing at least for the next 30 years. And eventually, it is expected to be stabilized eventually at the level of around 1.6 billion around the mid of the next century. According to the theory of economists, the free market system is not to be an absolutely perfect one. The pursuit of profit has driven people to do everything they want. As a result, lots of coal mines of various sizes appeared overnight and all crowded together, devastating forests and vegetation. Statistics show that in the past 30 years or so, the habitat of many wild animal species in the country has shrunk and their population have reduced dramatically. Giant panda, golden-haired monkey, Siberian tiger, and South China tigers, etc., are threatened by extinction. Take the ibis, a Japanese favorite bird. Its Latin name is called Nipponia nippon. That's the reason why it becomes a favorite bird for Japan. They were found over a wide area in the 50s, but now it can be seen only in a very restricted place in the Shanxi province. It accounted only 1 dozen. But we are pleased to see that, urged by the science and technology community, the Chinese government and the country's legislature have signed and ratified Convention on Biodiversity much earlier than United States did. Severe measures have been taken to protect endangered wildlife species. The Chinese science and technology community and the environmental sector have established and maintained very good cooperative relations with international organizations such as World Wildlife Fund, International Union for the Conservation of Nature, and others. China has benefited from their help and support in many related areas. In the early 80s, China joined the CITES, that is Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, in order to help people, and is now adopting measures to impose stern penalty on violators in order to help people all over the country to understand the responsibility to abide by the international convention. Another headache still exists for environmentalists in China. Thousands of years of practice of Chinese traditional medicine have proved that the rhino horn and the tiger bones, bear's bile, and the musk are considered the most effective medicines. The international intellectual community holds that it is necessary to and best to combine modern science with people's traditional wisdom. For that reason, the Chinese scientists are now working strenuously to find substitutes, so that China would not lose its wisdom in traditional medicine, while vigorously implementing the international convention. Last year, the government issued a strict order to ban the production of and trade of all medicines products that contain such ingredients as rhino horn and tiger bones, etc. Violators were punished, and things from illegal trade were confiscated and burned. Because of that, the pharmaceutical industry suffered a loss of $300 million. For the long-term interest of science and mankind, this Chinese government is ready to make efforts and sacrifices and persuade its people to follow. In 1992, China began to prepare its own Agenda 21. 52 ministries and agencies took part in the work, and the draft was completed and approved by the State Council last month. This document fully expresses China's determination to promote sustainable development and responsible attitude towards the international community. The document will serve as a blueprint for China's development into the 21st century. According to this Agenda 21, China will put the following priorities in sustainable development: to keep the momentum of GNP growth, to improve legislation and enforcement, to continue the efforts of population control, and to promote biodiversity conservation, to increase investment by savings and attracting foreign funds and investment, to increase export, to earn more foreign currencies, to enhance scientific research in the fields of population growth control, environment protection and conservation and biodiversity, Ladies and gentlemen, China is too big a country and was too early civilized. Even during the long history of tribulation and humiliation, a sense of self-sufficiency and inertial attitude were so prevailing and strong that many people felt contented with the idyllic lifestyle, totally oblivious of the need to interact with the outside world. Despite the influx of a very large number of Europeans and Americans who came to China since the 16th century, with Western science and technology, it took 200 years of twists and turns after the Industrial Revolution for the country to come to realize that the self-sufficient lifestyle could lead China to nowhere at all. According to the system theory, any change in such a giant system takes time. As Mr. Deng Xiaoping indicated, prosperity and democracy are the goals we have pursued for generations. But everybody should understand they cannot be achieved in a hurried way. China needs cooperation with outside friends, however. Without its own creative efforts and self-reliance, nobody could save it. China strove to learn from the Western systems for half a century and followed another system for more than 30 years, but did not succeed greatly in both cases. 15 years ago, China restarted the process of modernization drive in its own way. The first decade of experiment proved successful. It is expected that China's experiment could add a little contribution to the richness and colorfulness of human civilization. China and the United States have had years of successful cooperation in science and technology, which has already benefited both sides. I just came from the 6th meeting of the Sino-U.S. Joint Committee on Science and Technology held in Washington, D.C. 2 days ago, and feel encouraged by the successful cooperation with Dr. Gibbons. We co-chaired the meeting. The scientific advisor to President Clinton, and the new trends of development we earnestly push forward. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, China is rejuvenating. A new period of development has been unfolded. The past decade is just a prelude to the nation's modernization drive. She is changing extremely rapidly. I would like to invite all of you to come to China for a study, case study, for just acquaintance sake. It is recognized that that economics is a very much complicated discipline of science. For me, a natural science, it's most an amateur observer. To talk about economics, especially before the outstanding Bostonian community of economists, may just be a way to display my limited scope of knowledge. Finishing my talk now, I'm ready to have your criticism and remarks, comments. Thank you, everybody.
Well, we do have some time for questions, some limited time for questions. There are 2 microphones here, so if people would please line up at the microphone. If you would come to the microphone, and please be brief. It would help if you would identify yourself and pose your question. Please.
Hi.
There's a microphone here as well.
Hi, I'm Lisa Carter. I'm a student at the Kennedy School. I'm in a class, Environmental Management, and we have a little miniature case study on China. On Monday, I'm supposed to, along with 3 other students, discuss the pros and cons for China of joint implementation, which is one of the ways under the climate change agreement from Rio that countries can help reduce their carbon dioxide emissions. I was curious about what China's position is on joint implementation. Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's a bad idea? Thank you.
Thank you for your concern for China's climate change and other issues. You are welcome. I sincerely hope more and more younger people to study the problem and to analyze the situation both in China or elsewhere in this world. The attitude of China's government to the Convention on Climate Change is very clear. China is one of the most of many countries the first signed and ratified the Convention of Climate Change. But as the United States and China, we never promised to eliminate the emission of CO2. Not our people need energy. So we refrain from publicly give public promise to shut down all coal-burning power stations, as Sweden people did. They announced that within 10 years they will shut down all nuclear reactors. But nobody knows now what kind of substitute they would find in the future. But China, we refrain from that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Song, my name is Sarah Burgess-Reed. I'm an attorney in Boston. Thank you very much for your interesting talk. My question is about something you just touched on in your talk, the Three Gorges Dam project.
Oh, yes.
It seems like a very alarming project to many people. You, of course, are familiar with all the arguments against it. I don't need to go into them, but it seems like one thing that everybody could agree on, including people who live in Boston who are familiar with these costs of these enormous infrastructure projects that run away with themselves, is the enormous expense. Why not build a series of smaller dams along the river of 2 or 3 gigawatts each instead of building this unprecedentedly large and, in many people's view, extremely potentially dangerous dam?
Yes. May I give you immediately a second? It's a very good question. It really, for me, a appropriate time and occasion to give answer for this question. First, Chinese science community studied the case. We led a multidisciplinary study of all the subjects related to the Three Gorges project. The conclusion is much beneficial than not to build the Three Gorges project, the first one. The second, the primary reason is the flood coming through Three Gorges. Historically, every 5 years once, it would flood, or shall we, 3 to 4 provinces, threatening 30 million people's life every year. Only a high dam will build. After that, the flood, the threatening flood would be stopped. the second, the third reason. The fourth one is it would be a very powerful generator of electricity, 18 gigawatt capacity. Is very much attractive for China when it badly needed new resources of electricity.
Hi, my name is Chonghai Wang. I came from mainland China 6 years ago to the States. I studied at MIT, graduated, now working for McKinsey, which is a management consulting company. As a natural, Chinese, I naturally very care about economic development in China. So actually, I flew back today from Columbus just to listen to your talk. And I have a long list of questions, but being sensitive to the fact that maybe other people also have a long list of questions, so I limit to my question to 3. Should be very short answer.
Let's try one.
Okay. All right. Try one. All right. As Dr. Song mentioned, that there are 40% of Chinese companies are private. 40% GNP is generated by private companies, which means that 53% of companies still state-owned companies. And as I grew up in China, we know that the state-owned company is very efficient, usually have high cost and very low productivity. I don't know what the Chinese government's thinking on privatization or what kind of changes will be made on those state-owned companies. Thank you.
I would like to answer this question. Yes, as I indicated in my speech, now 47% of national products coming from non-governmental sector of economy. That is included private and contracted or joint venture from the other countries or shareholding companies and public. I mean the public as AT&T. AT&T collected money from every household. Nobody knows how many shareholders under his company. Well, this is public. We would call some economists. I learned from economists. They would call public company or economy. In the total Chinese policy, and I believe everybody now in the government and in the central position, the highest position, thought the necessity and vitality to further promote development of the non-governmental economy. The headache, I won't say headache now, is dealing with the state-owned and state-run enterprises. 2/3 of them is lost. Yeah. The only hope for China is to let them run in other way, not in the old track, along the old track as government-run, government-owned, and so forth. But Chinese people do not like the term privatization. They want to say other words. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is George Chang, and I'm an undergraduate here. I have a very short question for you. In a recent book, He Bo Chuan notes a massive desertification in North China, an advance of the desert. I was wondering if you could describe your assessment of the desert problem and any policies that the government might be putting forth to control it.
I'm very sorry. I'm not very deeply involved in the problem of desertification. I know the United Nations and the African governments called, appeal to organize a separate body under the United Nations to help developing countries and desert regions to lead or to conduct some project. China's Academy of Science, Dr. Hu's institute, they have very strong institute working in this field, and they achieved considerable success in the desert region of China. But it seems to me it takes time and it requires a lot of investment to convert a desert to a farmland. It takes time and money. Thank you.
Let's see, we will do these two more questions, then we will have to stop so you can try to make them brief. Identify yourself.
Yes, Dr. Song. My name is Michael Maher. I'm an attorney in Boston. I work with private power plant developers. You described the importance of private power plants to China's ability to grow in the future. But private power plants are very new to China. They're very new to the United States. Could you describe what concerns the government may have about privately financed, owned, and operated power plants as part of China's future?
I told you China's per capita electricity produced share only 700 kilowatt hour. A half of the world average, 1/15th of that of industrialized country. So China badly needed to increase the capacity of electricity generation. So China now officially announced it welcome anybody come to invest to build power station. Wherever the investment comes from, China's government do not care. But it said that China do not have a lot of money to invest that. We can only guarantee around 10,000 megawatt per year, but we need 15,000. So if your company and anybody else will be able to bring some foreign investment, wherever it comes from, please. Yeah. You will be protected by law and by all of us.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wanli Liu. I'm a research associate here at the Harvard School of Public Health. I have a very general question for Mr. Song regarding China's future.
Thank you.
I think a lot of people in this room would agree with me on the observation that China's rapid economic growth in the last decade is to a large extent due to China's very liberal economic reform policy, so masterfully engineered by the parliament leader Deng Xiaoping. Now, could you give us your personal assessment regarding China's economic and political prospect after Deng is gone to see Marx?
China, I would repeat some imagination. China, a giant nation, survived 5,000 years. We have passed through 2,000 floods. We washing away everything out from the earth, from the two rivers. And more than 1,000 earthquakes devastating almost most part of the nation. But that nation didn't think, survived and continue to develop. So I don't believe anybody, after anybody's life, the country would stop survive, would stop develop. No, that's all I can say.
Let me say two final words of appreciation here. One, the host for the Chinese delegation in this visit of Harvard is one of Harvard's most distinguished economists, our provost, Jerry Green, and what do I say? And secondly, to thank the entire delegation, and especially Dr. Sun, for your candid and informative remarks. Thank you very much.